Hi, I'm Antonio Mora. Today we look at how the chaos in Venezuela is generating chaos in American media and politics. While the catastrophic economic politics of Nicolás Maduro's dictatorship have caused mass hunger, thousands of deaths from easily treatable diseases, and what is likely the worst refugee crisis in the history of the Americas, the left and the right in the United States are resorting to knee-jerk reactions that border on the absurd. First, if you were to believe the American left, the Venezuelan collapse is the United States' fault. In a return to Cold War lingo, the left portrays the American government as an imperialist bad guy that is trying to impose its will on a small, defenseless third world country. That conveniently ignores that Cuba, Russia, and China are the real international villains in Venezuela, acting far more like imperialists than the United States. The dark joke in Caracas is that Cuba has colonized Venezuela and Venezuela paid it for the favor. While his people starve, Maduro sends large, heavily subsidized shipments of oil to the island. In exchange, he gets tens of thousands of Cuban military and security agents that prop him up, having thoroughly infiltrated Venezuela's power structure. Russia has also played a nefarious role. According to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Russia ordered Maduro to stay in Venezuela even though he was set to flee soon after the recent uprising. Russia has taken ownership of oil fields in Venezuela in exchange for loans and bailouts, and the Kremlin has sent military troops, ships, and planes. China has dumped more than $50 billion into Venezuela. To repay that investment, Venezuela is sending the Chinese almost a third of all its oil exports. Second, the left usually demands respect for human rights. So why no outrage over the Maduro regime's abuses? All major international organizations, human rights authorities, have condemned the horrific, systematic policy of repression carried out by Maduro's thugs. Third, the American left is understandably concerned about income inequality and wealth distribution here and abroad. So why are we hearing so little from them about how Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, have carried out socialist policies that have led to hyperinflation and so devastated the Venezuelan economy that 90% of Venezuelans are now living in poverty? Instead, PBS's Democracy Now!, which has been unrelenting in its criticism of U.S. policy toward Venezuela, gives voice to people like Representative Ilhan Omar. Omar has accused the U.S. of bullying Venezuela to, quote, eventually intervene and make regime change, while claiming that, quote, a lot of policies that we have put in place have kind of helped lead to the devastation in Venezuela, and we've sort of set the stage for where we're arriving today. Kind of? Sort of? Do Omar and the anchors of the show not know about the Chavez-Maduro expropriations, confiscations, exchange controls, price controls, and other socialist policies that devastated Venezuela's private sector? Do they not know about what some experts believe is the world's worst corruption, with even former Chavez officials estimating more than $300 billion disappeared in just a decade? Do they not know that the Venezuelan economy had already collapsed by August of 2017 when the U.S. announced its first broader sanctions? No country in the Americas or Western Europe has come close to suffering an economic calamity of this magnitude. In blaming the U.S., the left also ignores the example of Iran. U.S. sanctions on Iran since the hostage crisis 40 years ago have far exceeded anything Venezuela has faced, but Iran's poverty rate is about 20%, a fraction of Venezuela's 90%. Today, Iran's GDP per capita is twice that of Venezuela's, even though Venezuela's was always greater than Iran's until Chavez took power. The American rights response has been slightly more consistent, but muddled just the same. Senators Rick Scott and Marco Rubio, whose constituencies are full of Cuban Americans and a growing number of Venezuelan Americans, have issued thinly veiled calls for U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. Those of a libertarian isolationist bent oppose U.S. foreign intervention in principle and, by extension, don't want American troops meddling in Venezuelan affairs. Some, including Fox News host Tucker Carlson, argue against sending the Marines by pointing out that recent American adventurism has failed around the world. Carlson asked whether we're, quote, prepared for the refugees a Venezuelan war would inevitably produce, citing a Brookings Institution study that found that the collapse of the Venezuelan government could force 8 million people to leave. What Carlson missed is that it stated the Venezuelan refugee crisis could reach that magnitude and surpass the Syrian crisis without a war. Neoconservatives, including Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, are predictably rattling their sabers, teasing military intervention. Bolton said the Trump administration is not afraid to use the Monroe Doctrine and that the U.S. would not allow Russia to take over a country in the Western Hemisphere. He forgets that Venezuela is a big country with a serious military, not Panama or Grenada. Even so, Bolton and Pompeo's boss has undercut them. After 2 years of saying all options are on the table in Venezuela, President Trump reportedly expressed frustration with the drumbeat of war from his senior advisors. Then, after talking with Vladimir Putin, Trump further undermined his senior aides by downplaying how involved Russia is in Venezuela. As has often been the case, Trump believes what Putin says, not what Putin does. So, while everyone bickers, an illegitimate dictator keeps starving his own people, swamping Venezuela's neighbors with refugees, and destroying what's left of a country whose riches were once the envy of the developing world.